Hi, good morning. Thank you for having me. And thank you to Ellen and Peter. Those were really excellent primers for kind of what we're talking about here, which is, you know, early implementation planning and design phases. So this is I'm going to talk about the North Basin in Berkeley. It's a project I've been working on for the last couple of years with the East Bay Regional Park District. The North Basin Strip is located in East Shore State Park, and we're focused in Berkeley. So we can go to the next slide. Just to orient you a little bit, our project location is just south of the racetrack and adjacent to the Gilman Sparks Fields and south of it, and then bounded on the south by Berkeley Meadow. I think what so our project got started a couple years before Rawls kicked off, and so we are looking both at some of the upland improvements to the East Shore State Park, as well as that long shoreline band that's shown in this image here. Thanks. A brief bit of history. This hasn't always been land. It used to be baylands and a fringe marsh with a sandy beach at the front. And in the early 20th century, we saw a lot of fill in the bay, particularly in Berkeley. And so our project site and a large portion of McLaughlin East Shore State Park is on land that was once landfill. And so the project outline is shown in that orange dash. And as we move forward, so really, our project, we needed to develop some project goals. And really, at the Park District, we look at two main project goals always, improving habitat and public access. Those are our dual mission that we're always trying to balance. And at this location within East Shore State Park, the general plan designated it as active recreation, as opposed to a lot of East Shore has been designated for preservation or restoration. And so in the upland areas, we were looking at compatible uses to adjacent land use. And to the north of our project site, we have the Gilman Sports Fields, and then to the south, we have Berkeley Meadow. And so we have this kind of transition zone within uses. And then as we looked at the shoreline, we were also looking at, how do we transition from, where we see people congregating around the Gilman Street area. And then as we move south toward kind of that more quieter nature trails within Berkeley Meadow. And so when I show you the plan as developed, that's some of the thought that was brought into it. And being on the shoreline, climate resiliency is super important. And then
We might just
being,
break in and ask everyone to
yeah,
mute. Thanks so much. I think someone's off mute. Sorry, Scott.
thanks, Marilyn. And then really we're trying to make practical plans that are actionable within the park district's operational budgetary constraints. Then we can go to the next slide. And then the project is really unique, at least in my experience, because we really had a really heavy public relations and public outreach element. The East Shore State Park, its history is really born out of citizen activism, and there's a really strong, citizen science and participation within Park District planning in this area. And so we really welcomed in a lot of the folks who really helped to establish East Shore State Park and brought in new voices into the mix also. And so through that process, we developed 6 community priorities that are listed here, and we really try to integrate those within the planning process. We can go to the next slide. In the planning process, I think that Peter really brought up a lot of what goes into this early stage planning, and I'll just iterate where we are in the process. We developed a preliminary design that I'll show in just a few moments, but we're kind of tag teaming with this Rawls process. So our project got to a preliminary level design, and then the design team that Marilyn mentioned is taking some of that work and progressing it, and then also looking into some of the subtile areas for other other improvements for habitat there. Um, but considering the shoreline, one of the first things that we'll do is look at existing threats to sea level rise and erosion. This site has a mix of shoreline protection, where there's some ad hoc riprap that was placed, some slags of concrete that were end dumped over time, and then there's unprotected shoreline. And in that unprotected shoreline, you can see with those red arrows, we're seeing levels of erosion and transport of some of that eroded material through that dominant northwest wind wave action. Looking at current sea levels and king tides, we do see overtopping of existing berms in a couple of places. Those are highlighted in that dark blue area, both along next to uh, the ball fields on the upper right, and then on the south adjacent to Berkeley Meadow. And looking at the Ocean Protection Council's sea level rise projections through the end of the century, we get a sense of what's to come. And then if we go to the next slide, um, this is kind of fast forwarding into how do we look at accommodating sea level rise where we can, maybe holding the line where we desire to maintain public access. And so we're looking at a couple of different approaches. And so we have this idea of protecting and accommodating sea level rise. And so in the north, I'll talk a little bit more about this and show it in visuals, but we're looking to implement a gathering promenade, and we'll be elevating that above projected sea levels. Looking at implementing a perched beach, again, where we have that sandy gathering area, but having that elevated above projected sea level rise. And then where we are looking to kind of invite that water in or accept it into the site, we are looking at installing seasonal ponds, which would be where we're seeing some of the king tides come into the site currently adjacent to the sports fields, and then looking at managed retreat kind of on that south side, that east-west road we call the Virginia Street extension near the Berkeley Meadow. And so we're looking at different approaches for different elements of the site as appropriate. You go to the next slide. And then harkening back to what Peter shared in terms of looking at reference sites, both within the bay and also on site. Our design team did just that, and this idea of having these islets that are kind of large, immovable, unerodable, rock formations, or in this case, slags of concrete do the job. But they tend to refract the wind waves and help to shelter some areas around it where we see some of these beaches forming and almost an extension of the shoreline to meet that islet. And so in that unprotected shoreline on the southern portion of the site, seeing that as a potential approach to creating a nature-based solution where the beaches can get created and protected in that area. The next slide is looking at the very southern end of the site, looking at a gravel beach that has formed and maintained primarily through the transport and gathering of some of the material, some of the larger coarse material that was evacuated and eroded from the face of the unprotected shoreline. And I think one of the interesting things, and it really mirrors what Peter was saying in terms of being resilient to sea level rise and that gravel being pushed up on the profile as with the wind waves, and then we have a protected, albeit very small, marsh behind the beach. So Seeing that on the site was really helped us to conceptualize, how we can treat uh, that area facing the bay. Go to the next slide. And then the other reference that we took from the site uh, is this idea of freshwater seeps coming out of that filled land and having it and seeing how it really feeds and maintains salt grass. So we have these relatively gentle slopes adjacent to these 4 or 5 foot tall eroding scarps, and seeing how we can uh, preserve those because they're doing nature's work to protect the shoreline and work our design elements in and around some of those elements. You can go to the next slide. And so this is kind of the overall shoreline plan that we are progressing. As I mentioned, we're looking to have this northern promenade at the northern part of the site where we have this area for the public to gather adjacent to the ball fields. And then as we move south, we have an area where the king tides are already lapping onto the site. And so with a really modest amount of grading, we're able to create these seasonal tidal ponds that will evolve over time as the sea level rise and the habitat can transition to more of a salt marsh, perhaps. And then as we move south, we have another gathering area, kind of at this transition zone between that parking area and our wide open space that we're looking to preserve and enhance the trail network within the North Basin itself, North Basin Strip. And then as we move further south, we have that nature-based approach um, to protecting that currently eroding shoreline. And so that's where we have this gravel beach that is uh, uh, sequenced with this islet and Tombolo uh, uh, shoreline face. And so that's really where we are in terms of our approach for this project. The next couple of slides um, are a little bit more kind of a before and not quite after, but what we see as where we're going with the design. So as I mentioned, the king tide inundation in that northern area, that's a photo of our existing shoreline, the concrete rubble and the concrete slabs that are there. And we go to the next slide, looking at creating that promenade with stepped access adjacent to the promenade. And then as we move further south to that perched gravel beach, perched sand beach. And then as we move further south, this is an example of how we see that the tidal, uh, the seasonal tidal ponds could exist, kind of as the high tides coming in and inundating, and then draining either on that daily or kind of monthly tide cycle. And as we move further south, there's a image that I showed just briefly before. Then if we go to the next one, you'll see kind of a rendering of how those islets and tumbolos could be integrated into the site and how they might function with some large woody debris that is integrated into that back beach area, and having them be at kind of irregular intervals and sizes, I think would help to create that naturalistic pattern within the landscape. Next slide. We don't need to, yeah, we can just quickly go through these, but just a little blow up of, some of um, the photos and images of how we see some of those upland areas being developed for public use. The promenade, maybe a sculptural play area, step seating down to the water's edge in that northern area. And then if we go to the next slide, we've got that perch beach and then some of the internal use. We have an existing mountain bike teams that tend to use this area already, and so looking to formalize that use on the internal portion of the site. And then if we go further south, um, looking at really preserving some of those more quieter spaces, formalizing the trails on the internal areas of the site, um, and then kind of paired with those islets and tombolos, thinking about creating these shoreline gathering nodes where really people, small groups are able to go out and find an area that's sheltered from the elements, from the wind and the sun at times, and really enjoy the site. I think we're good. Yeah, and that's where we are. Like I mentioned, so this is a preliminary design that we developed, just finished up work in the past couple of months, and looking to pass the baton to the Rawls project to progress things a bit, and then working with their team and our board and our stakeholders here to really move the work forward within the North Basin itself and the strip, as we call it. So yeah, thanks for your time and talk soon.
Yeah, thanks so much, Scott. I This is my first time hearing about the this latest design here, and amazing the different amenities on the shoreline and inland that you're proposing to integrate. So happy to see it moving forward. There was one question I kind of saw in the chat about reuse of existing material that's on the shoreline, kind of some of that legacy concrete, for example, or other kind of slabs that are there now. Did the design team talk at all about potential reuse of those materials in a creative way, or?
I think primarily looking at the areas kind of in that intertidal zone and subtidal area where we do see colonization of some of that concrete with vegetation. So thinking about ways that we can, cut and reuse to those chunks and place them in different areas to kind of reseed and encourage colonization post project. That's one of the main ways that we're thinking about it. And then there's an option that we might give the contractor in terms of breaking up and reusing some of that material if it kind of meets project needs and specifications for other areas on the site.